We also need really to investigate properly the way that Russia has tried to undermine British democracy over the past decade, because we really need to learn those lessons for the future. We now know how dangerous Russia is, and yet for a long time the government were refusing even to investigate whether they've been interfering with our democracy in a way that many people are convinced they are.
Ian Lucas is indeed with me now. Ian Lucas, welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much, Hugo. Nice to speak to you.
Nice to speak to you too, and thanks very much for being with us. Look, you were an MP until 2019, but we should start with, a brief version of your own electoral story from 2015 onwards, and how that kind of led you into this story and the impact of online advertising in your own story.
There were really two threads that struck me around the 2015 general election. Firstly, I became aware that there were large donations going into political parties locally in North Wales. My seat was in Wrexham, from a source that I didn't know, couldn't identify, and sounded like they were from abroad. And secondly, I noticed for the first time that Facebook was having a huge influence on the doorstep in terms of the identity, the promotion of other candidates in the campaign, which was something I've never really come across before. Name recognition of opposing candidates was very, very high in a way that had never happened in the 5 or so general elections that I'd fought before.
Sure, and basically this is all an area that you looked into in depth as part of the Digital Culture, Media and Support Select Committee in Parliament towards the end of the last decade. Tell us a bit about the key findings that committee found.
Key findings were that we found that there was overseas interference going on. It was notable that the biggest number of investigations into the report itself, in other words, the people looking at the report, were largely from Russia when it was actually published. So we knew that there were investigations going on. We wanted the government and called on the government, made a recommendation to make investigations into the possible overseas interference that had been happening. And we also established that campaigning was happening on a huge scale online in a way that was transformational, in a way that meant that, for example, long-standing conventions like spending on political advertising, film political advertising, which we had banned in Britain really throughout our lifetime, was now becoming enormous, and huge filmed advertising was playing a part in our politics in a way that was unprecedented and is still going on today. And that we needed essentially to begin to regulate the online campaigning world in the same way that we've always regulated the offline campaigning world.
Right. And so, I mean, look, to really simplify this, the problem we're talking about here is that money comes into our political system in the forms of online political advertising, and we don't necessarily know where that money's coming from, and the companies with the power to tell us where that money's coming from don't want to, or perhaps don't even know themselves, right?
Absolutely. The powers for the regulators to look into where the money comes from simply aren't there. So we have to take everything on trust. And when we first began to investigate this in 2018, I was particularly concerned about overseas funding. And you'll recall that I questioned a Facebook executive about overseas funding. This was, remember, after the Brexit campaign, after the election of Donald Trump. And they said to me, oh, that's something we haven't really thought about. That seemed extraordinary to me. And we've seen in recent months, because of everything that's happened in Ukraine, the whole issue of Russian interference in UK politics becoming very prominent. I think the other key point that is hugely important is that the amount of spending on advertising outside electoral periods, that's outside the 4 or 5 weeks before an election actually happens, is completely unlimited. So there's a huge amount of money being spent in UK politics. One donor, for example, has contributed over £1 million in the last 10 years to the Conservative Party. This also applies in the Labour Party. We saw the issues around Barry Cardiner. And what's extraordinary is that this is completely unregulated. And the Electoral Commission has actually had its powers reduced by the elections bill that's just gone through Parliament, rather than increased to actually look at these issues.
To tackle the specifics of what was happening in the last half of the last decade, then, if I understand this right, the position of Facebook is that while there was opaque money going into the US election in 2016, and they found it and tracked it, and in large part it was from Russia, there was nothing to date really of significance they could find in the UK, either in relation to Brexit or anything else. Do you buy that?
No, I don't buy that, because there's an organisation called Aggregate IQ who are a partner organisation of Cambridge Analytica. And those organisations together were hugely prominent in the Brexit campaign. Aggregate IQ was actually the main source of online advertising for the official Vote Leave campaign. So those were the people actually doing the delivery of the mechanisms through Facebook, something we only discovered through our committee. So I don't accept what Facebook said to us. And it was shown through the hearings that took place in 2018 that Facebook were very evasive in everything that they were saying to us. And when they had the opportunity to send out their position in 2018, they simply didn't do so. And it was only by other sources that we were able to establish the facts of what happened in 2015 and 2016, when Facebook information was revealed of that there'd been a huge leak of data which had been used in subsequent political campaigns.
Sure. Look, the kind of the Leave campaign from what the Leave side of the Brexit campaign, in many respects, sort of transformed into what is now Boris Johnson's government. I'll ask this sort of question carefully, because we need to be careful of legal considerations and people who aren't here to reply back. But do you think that there are people in government today who know that there were things that were done wrong in terms of how British political campaigns have been funded, and they're sitting there knowing that rules were broken, perhaps even laws were broken, and this is just something that they no longer wish to investigate or take seriously?
I do think there are, Hugo, and I think what's amazing is that despite all of the information that was revealed in our inquiry, and also by subsequent reports like the Intelligence and Security Committee report on Russian interference, we haven't changed the law at all. And this is still an unregulated sphere. And this is affecting, we talked about the general election coming up a few moments ago. This will be massive in the next election. The main way of fighting elections now is online. And that will have applied just as readily to the local elections that we've just seen as the general election that's about to come up. Every day, huge numbers of political adverts are being pumped out there. One example, for example, is that the West Midlands mayoralty campaign, Andy Street, the Conservative mayor, spent £104,000 on Facebook advertising. Those figures came from Facebook Direct. His opponent spent £41,000 on Facebook advertising. Now, those figures are probably in excess of what I spent in my entire political career on expenditure on elections. And the fundamental question here is, for many, many years, I spoke with American politicians who said to me that one of the curses of their lives was the amount of fundraising they had to do to pay for advertising. We are moving into that world unseen. In fact, we've moved there already in British politics. And the fundamental question is, do we want our politics to be poisoned in this way, for money to be playing such an important role, and for advertising to be directed not openly across different candidates, but individually, privately, online, by targeted advertising that's happening every day to individual people on their own computers. I mean, so that this is campaigning and in the dark. Your opponent doesn't actually know what you're saying about you in an election campaign, and you may never find out.
Until now, this has been not entirely, but largely an issue about Facebook. What are the implications from this perspective of Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter? Well,
Elon Musk, there is no political advertising on Twitter at the moment. That's a decision that Twitter made in response to the controversy that happened. Now, if Elon Musk, as an individual, decides he's going to allow political advertising on Twitter, that's going to happen. And it seems extraordinary to me in an advanced democracy that an individual on a platform can make that decision. And we have no rules and regulations to control that level of decision making at all at the present time. So we need to re-secure some kind of control on our electoral process. We've always had pretty clean elections. I fought 6 general elections, I think, and although they're hotly contested and passionate and all the rest of it, they were fought within rules that we've all accepted. There were strict constituency spending limits and all of that. And those just don't exist at the present time because of the way the campaigns are being fought. And there's a resistance in all of the major political parties to actually reset the rules to operate in the digital age. And what that means is that we're having individual campaigns being directed at particular groups in a much more confrontational atmosphere in politics without any form of sort of town hall debate of the type that we had in the past.
Do you think there's a new appetite to understand the extent to which sort of dark money can influence British politics in this kind of way since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and a new understanding of the Russian influence in British politics? Or do you think that still not enough people are making the connection?
I think not enough people are making the connection, but there is a bigger appetite because of it, because of the Russian invasion. I think there was a spike, certainly, in interest in the issue when the Russian invasion happened. And we also need really to investigate properly the way that Russia has tried to undermine British democracy over the past decade, because we really need to learn those lessons for the future. We now know how dangerous Russia is. And yet, for a long time, the government were refusing even to investigate whether they've been interfering with our democracy in a way that many people are convinced they are.
Yeah.
But so I think there's a lot still to be done. We've learned an awful lot in the last 5 years. I certainly have as an individual and as a member of parliament, but we've done nothing to address the fundamental problems that really do threaten our open democracy, our liberal democracy in the UK.
Look, final question before I let you go. As a former Labour MP, we just had the local elections. How do you feel your team did?
I think they did reasonably well, but they need to be doing better. I think that the enthusiasm that needs to be there to win the next general election on the doorstep, I don't think is there, but I think it can be. And I think that we need to be realistic about assessing that and begin to focus on engaging much more positively with the electorate and painting a picture of what the next Labour government is going to look like and how they're going to actually affect and drive forward people's individual lives and make their lives better. We're a very fractured society at the minute, and I think that creating a sense of unity within the country is an aim that we really need to focus on heavily and be the picture that we present before the next election.
Thank you very much indeed. That is Ian.